Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the stories and please subscribe. It's been nearly 20 years since this took place. It's one of those things that you never forget, although I wish I could. I was 16 years old and we lived in rural Virginia, on an isolated farmhouse about 15 miles from town. The house, a modest single-story ranch located on 12 acres of dense woods, felt both comforting and isolating. Our property was dotted with a couple of outbuildings and a large barn, with a long, winding dirt driveway extending from the house to the main road. It was late summer, and I rode my bike up the driveway after spending the afternoon at my friend's house down the street. The place was dark and seemed oddly foreboding that evening. My dad was still at work, and I forget where Mom was, but this left Martin, my 13-year-old brother, alone at home. He was always the quiet one, lost in his world of video games and comics. I parked my bike in the barn, its interior crammed with farm equipment and junk. As I approached the house, a faint unease crept over me. The basement door at the side of the house stood open, an unusual sight since Mom insisted it stay closed and locked. I figured Martin must be in there, and had left it open for ventilation. Virginia summers being notoriously hot and stifling. As I walked down the steps to the basement, I was surprised by the darkness, the cool air, and the stillness. Something felt off. I called out for Martin as I flipped on the light, his voice responding from upstairs. I heard the door open above me, his nose crinkled as he bounced down the wooden steps, turning on more lights as he went. "What's that smell?" he asked. It was then that I noticed it too, a faint musty odor out of place amidst the usual basement scents. I asked Martin why he left the basement door open. His response was that he didn't. He said he'd been in the family room all afternoon, the headphones he was wearing likely drowning out any unusual sounds. "Well, someone did," I said. I became slightly unnerved at the thought the door had been left unlocked and somebody could have entered the house. Martin insisted that if someone had come upstairs, he would have noticed. We turned the basement upside down looking for anyone or anything out of place. We found nothing. Feeling somewhat reassured, I headed to my room, the unease slowly evaporating. About a half hour later, I returned to the basement to watch TV. However, something felt wrong as I sank into the old sofa. The cushions were unusually hard, less soft than usual. I got up and lifted one of the cushions, expecting perhaps a misplaced book or TV remote, but instead, I staggered back and screamed. There, beneath the cushion, lay a lifeless body of a man, his skin pale, eyes staring back at me blankly. Panic seized me. I bolted upstairs, colliding with Martin, who was rushing down to see what the commotion was about. Shoving him back up the stairs, we stumbled into the kitchen, locking the basement door behind us. Trembling, I relayed the horrifying discovery. We called our parents, who in turn called the police, as they rushed home in a frenzy of fear and confusion. The police investigation later determined the body to be that of our closest neighbor, Bill, whose wife had also gone missing a few days earlier. I never got much information after that, and as far as we know, the culprit has never been found, and neither has Bill's wife. A couple of years ago, a seemingly simple job took a chilling turn into the horrifying. My dad, knowing my knack for tech stuff thanks to my computer science major, came home with an easy job offer. One of his colleagues at work needed a reliable person to house sit while he was away. This sounded like a perfect gig. The house was wired with professional-grade cameras in every nook and cranny, all feeding into a central monitoring station. The guy was willing to pay $300 for a couple of days of just hanging out and watching his house. Easy money, right? My dad drove me over to this place, introducing me to the homeowner, Brian. What struck me was his insistence that I park myself in an upstairs room, surrounded by screens showing every angle of his home and property. It felt like overkill, but hey, I wasn't complaining. I settled in, splitting my time between watching TV, doing schoolwork on my laptop, and occasionally glancing at the monitors. A thought nagged at me as the night rolled along. Where was I supposed to sleep? The homeowner hadn't mentioned anything. Curious, I scanned the screens, searching for a spare bedroom or a couch. But then, something odd caught my eye. The back screen door downstairs was wide open. I was sure it had been closed earlier. Panic set in as I flipped through the camera feeds. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it, an open closet door in the living room. That door was definitely closed before. I shot a text to my dad, asking him to check if the homeowner had returned. Meanwhile, my eyes were glued to the screens. In the grainy, shadowy footage, a figure emerged from the closet. Tall, shrouded in darkness, it was more a shadow than a person. My hands flew to my mouth in shock, and in my haste, my elbow sent a pile of textbooks crashing to the floor. The sound was thunderous in the silent room. The figure froze on the screen, then slowly, deliberately tilted its head toward the ceiling. My heart was in my throat as it began climbing the stairs, each step slow and deliberate. My phone buzzed, Dad texting back, "No, he hasn't returned. Why?" I was frantically typing a reply when I saw a shadow pass by under the door. I froze, my eyes darting between the door and the monitors. The screen showing the hallway outside my room made my blood run cold. There it was, the shadowy figure right outside. The door had no lock. Panic surged through me, and in a split-second decision, I flung myself out the window, landing in the bushes below with a thud. I sprinted down the street, panting, heart racing, only stopping when my dad called. I urged him to call his friend to tell him about the intruder. The homeowner was baffled. No friends or family had his key, and no one should have been there. He called the police, and I met them back at the house along with my dad. I watched it all with them, the cameras showing the intruder entering through the back door and my narrow escape. The intruder ran out the way he had come in and disappeared. He was never found. The footage was too dark and grainy to ever identify him.
A few months ago, a friend of mine was kicked out of her program at the university for bad grades. She'd been renting a house with 3 other roommates, all of whom were students at the college. Since she was only living in the city while attending school, she didn't see any point in continuing to rent the place. She told me if I wanted to sublease the room from her, she'd only charge me half the rent. This seemed like a pretty sweet deal to me. The house was super nice and in a good area of town close to the university. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs and 2 in the basement. The room I was renting in the basement was small but cozy. The only other room down there belonged to a girl who was currently a student, and she was pretty quiet. The other 2 roommates lived on the 2nd floor. The 3rd bedroom upstairs was empty. I'm the only one in the house who isn't a student and the only one originally from this town. So, unless there's something special going on, they all go home on the weekends, leaving me alone in the house. One additional thing I need to mention is that there had been a 5th roommate, but she had a seizure on her bed and passed away shortly after moving in. This was upsetting for everyone, and the landlord told them not to worry about finding anyone else. Their rent never went up, and the room was left vacant. After the girl's death, her parents came and packed up her stuff, and the room has remained empty ever since. I never looked in there and wasn't curious to see it. Since it's on the 2nd floor and I never go up there, I never really paid much attention to it. My first weekend at my new place was pretty uneventful. I spent Friday night at my boyfriend's place, and he spent Saturday at mine. It was nice having the entire place to ourselves, and we ordered in food and watched some movies. The following weekend, I was hanging out at home doing some reading. I enjoyed the house's quietness since I assumed all the girls had gone home as usual. I thought I heard a few noises from upstairs, so I figured that one of the girls had probably decided to stay the weekend, or was just getting some last-minute things ready before heading home. I wasn't very close with the roommates, so I didn't bother asking any of them what their plans were. I just felt like it was none of my business. The girl in the basement was for sure gone that weekend because she sleeps with her door locked and keeps it open whenever she's not home. A couple of weekends later, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and thought I heard a toilet flush upstairs. This was weird since I knew none of the girls were home. I was going to check it out, but in my tired state, I just went back to bed. I probably should have investigated, but I'm the type of person who always thinks there's a rational explanation for everything. Over the next couple of months, whenever I heard weird noises, I just brushed it off. For example, I heard a creaking coming from the second floor and figured one of the girls had forgotten something and decided to swing by and pick it up. In hindsight, this didn't make sense, but I didn't think much about it at the time. One Saturday, I woke up to get some water and noticed that the roommate in the basement was gone. Her door was open, and there weren't any cars in the driveway. All the girls had cars except one of them. A few hours later, I woke up when I heard footsteps approaching the basement. At this point, I yelled out the girl's name who doesn't drive, since she's the only one who could have been in the house. I didn't get a reply and just heard the footsteps going back upstairs. I started feeling uneasy about being home on the weekends, so I decided to just spend them at my boyfriend's instead. I told my roommates that some creepy stuff was happening around the house and asked them if they could just start letting me know if they'd be home for the night or not. They seriously thought I was joking around and being paranoid. Even my boyfriend thought that I was being paranoid because everything seemed normal every time he'd stay over. He kept saying that old houses made noises, but I felt like I knew the difference between old house noises and someone walking around. One weekend, my roommates told me they wouldn't be at the house, and my boyfriend was on the midnight shift, so I had to spend the night alone. My boyfriend called me on his break, and while I was on the phone with him, I heard noises coming from the main floor. I told him I was going to check it out, and he told me to go ahead because he still thought I was being paranoid. As I held the phone, I heard the footsteps going back up to the second floor. Once I got onto the main floor, there was nobody in the kitchen, and all of the doors in the house were locked. I was definitely feeling uneasy and really didn't feel safe. My boyfriend calmed me down and convinced me that everything was fine. After that weekend, I told my roommates, in all seriousness, that I was convinced that someone had been in our house at some point that night. I told them what I heard, and they all still claimed that it was just the old house making noises. My boyfriend was almost permanently on midnight shifts, so I did what I never wanted to do, and started spending weekends at my parents' place. Then one Friday night, when 2 of my 3 roommates were gone and the third was staying at the house alone, things took a dramatic turn. By this point, I'd been sleeping at my parents' every weekend, so I was gone too. It was Saturday morning, and I get this frantic text from the roommate who was staying home that weekend. She says she had been attacked in the house the night before. As I later learned, she was studying in her room and heard a noise outside her bedroom door. When she went out to investigate, she was met by a man walking out of the dead girl's room. The man looked rough and had greasy hair and a pockmarked face. When they made eye contact, he held his finger up to his mouth and uttered "shh" while smiling. The nail on his finger was long and dirty, and his beard was apparently really scraggly and uneven, like it only grew on certain parts of his face. She screamed and tried to slam the door to her room shut, but he lunged at her and forced his way inside. He beat her up, then walked out, down the stairs, and out the front door, leaving the dead girl's room unlocked. My roommate locked herself in her room and called the police. When they arrived, they inspected the dead girl's room. It turned out he had built himself a pretty sweet setup in there with a bed, TV, and other personal belongings. Most of his stuff was still there since he likely didn't expect a confrontation that night. He must have thought he had the house to himself. I doubt he knew she was there because she usually never was. Before I moved in, he probably had the whole place to himself every weekend. The police did their investigation. My 3 roommates became convinced that maybe the other girl didn't die of a seizure, but was murdered by this guy. I wasn't ready to go that far since I'm sure the autopsy would be able to distinguish a murder from a seizure. But anyway, the whole thing was super creepy. We were never sure how long the guy had been living there, but it was likely at least a few months. The theory was that the guy had been climbing in and out through the window, so it's possible he was even there during the week. At the time, the police seemed optimistic about finding the guy, but I don't think they ever did. I packed up my stuff and moved back home with my parents. Even though all this guy's stuff had been cleaned out of the room and the window locked tightly, I never felt comfortable going back there again.
Thanks for watching and please subscribe.